His body isn't found till about a month later. He is discovered in the Mulberry River with concrete blocks reportedly attached to his neck and ankles and hogtied. This story started with the Dixie Mafia, but the deeper I got into Ruth Chancey, the more I realized something. Ruth wasn't simply somebody who happened to be around powerful men. Ruth Chancey appears to have had power of her own. And one way to understand that power is look at the men she married. Her first husband was Hoke Smith Chancey. And Hoke wasn't just another North Georgia moonshiner. Historical accounts identify Hoke Chancey as one of the biggest figures in Georgia's illegal whiskey business, and even describing him as the largest whiskey dealer in Georgia. When Hoke died in a tractor accident in 1959, Ruth didn't disappear from that world. Quite the opposite. Accounts from Billy Sunday Birt's circle describe Ruth as becoming an important figure in the whiskey operation herself. Billy Birt worked closely with the Chanceys. Harold Chancey, Ruth and Hoke's son, was one of Billy's close friends. And according to Billy's accounts, Ruth developed such a reputation that she became known as Ruthless Ruth. This is the woman who would eventually become known as the godmother of the Dixie Mafia. Then Ruth married Jim Daws. And Jim Daws is important for more than simply being husband number two. Daws was a prominent businessman in that community. He operated a feed and supply business in an area where illegal whiskey was a major underground industry. And think about what that means. You cannot make whiskey on that scale without sugar. And I mean a lot of sugar. And I'm not telling you I have a receipt showing Jim Daws supplied Ruth Chancey's moonshine operation. I'm telling you to understand the environment. He's operating a feed and supply business. He's married to a woman deeply connected to the whiskey world. And eventually, he becomes somebody authorities believe knows enough about local moonshiners that they want him to testify. That alone tells you Jim Daws knew a lot of shit. By 1971, Ruth and Jim's marriage was falling apart. While all this was happening, Ruth is already demonstrating that she is not some powerless woman sitting on the sidelines. Because authorities had already tried to shut down property connected to her. In Chancey versus Hancock, the Piedmont Judicial Circuit District Attorney brought a nuisance action involving buildings Ruth owned and a business allegedly being operated there by Fred Cooper. And look who Ruth had representing her, Richard B. Russell III. This isn't some courthouse appointed lawyer nobody had ever heard of. That's another example of the level of reputation Ruth Chancey could put around herself when she needed it. The Supreme Court decided Chancey versus Hancock on November 12, 1969, and Ruth got relief from the Supreme Court. So keep that timeline in your head. Hoke is dead. Ruth is involved in the whiskey world. She's married to Jim Daws. She's fighting the DA all the way to the Georgia Supreme Court with Richard B. Russell III representing her. And then Jim Daws becomes a potential witness for investigators. Then on November the 22nd, 1971, Jim Daws disappears. His body isn't found till about a month later. He is discovered in the Mulberry River with concrete blocks reportedly attached to his neck and ankles and hogtied. His automobile was found submerged in Lake Lanier, and according to accounts surrounding Billy Birt and his organization, the method of disposing of the body will become associated with Billy Birt's crew. Now, Ruth Chancey has outlived husband number two. Then come Curtis Rowe. And this one caught my attention for another reason. Curtis Rowe was a farmer. And anybody who's been following New Media Dixie Mafia series ought to recognize that pattern by now. A.C. Cliff Park was a farmer. A.D. Allen was a farmer. Hoke Chancey was a farmer. Harold Chancey was a farmer. Curtis Rowe was a farmer. I'm not telling you being a farmer makes you somebody in the Dixie Mafia. I'm telling you that when you're studying this network, agriculture keeps showing up. Farms provided land, equipment, building, trucks, privacy, rural roads, places where legitimate businesses and an underground economy could exist beside each other without attracting much attention. Curtis later worked in carpentry and construction. He died in 1993. Now, Ruth has outlived husband number 3. Then we get to the last husband, Wayne E. Wright. And Wayne was completely different from what I expected to find. This wasn't some broke country boy Ruth married late in her life. Wayne Wright graduated from Duke University. He served in the United States Army during World War II, and according to his obituary, he retired from Smoky Mountain Trailways and National Trailways in Atlanta and had been a former owner. That's transportation. And once again, I'm not saying Wayne Wright transported 1 gallon of moonshine for anybody. I'm saying look at the world Ruth Chancey lived in. Whiskey doesn't move itself. Pills don't move themselves. Money don't move itself. People don't move themselves. Transportation matters. And Wayne Wright came from a family with serious experience in the transportation industry. His father, Joel W. Wright Sr., and Wayne were associated with the Smoky Mountain Trailways before their operation became part of the larger trailway system. So Ruth's husbands were not 4 random men. One was tied to Top Georgia's illegal whiskey business. One was a prominent feed and supply businessman who became a potential witness concerning local moonshiners and wound up dead in the Mulberry River. One came from the same agricultural world that keeps appearing throughout this story, and the last one came from the transportation business. Then there's Ruth herself, because 5 years later, after Jim Daws disappeared, Ruth's name is right back in the middle of another major case involving murder, arson, insurance, and allegations of a criminal enterprise. Before the fire involved in that case, Ruth had contacted an insurance agent about increasing coverage on the properties. After that fire, she filed a claim. And when the insurance company resisted paying, Ruth fought them tooth and nail, and she got paid. The insurance company ultimately paid the claim plus a late fee. And when Ruth herself eventually faced prosecution, look who showed up beside her. Bobby Lee Cook, one of the premier criminal trial lawyers in America. That's the second time in Ruth's story where you find heavyweight legal representation when the stakes get serious. First, you have Richard B. Russell III, later Bobby Lee Cook. And Ruth's case was severed. Then came the health issues involving gastrointestinal problems. But here's what makes it worth mentioning, because Ruth Chancey didn't die until 2008. She lived 2.5 decades beyond prosecution. Hoke Chancey died in 1959. Jim Daws died in 1971. Curtis Rowe died in 1993. Wayne Wright died in 1999. And Ruth Chancey died in 2008 at 93 years old. She outlived 4 husbands. And when you put the whole picture together, that's why I don't look at Ruth Chancey as simply Billy Burke's friend, Harold Chancey's mom, Hoke Chancey's widow, or some woman standing around the edges of the Dixie Mafia. Ruth Chancey had her own story. She moved through whiskey, business, property, money, influential husbands, and powerful lawyers, while names around her kept disappearing, dying, getting arrested, or going to prison.